Well, we're now joined by Canada's Auditor General, Karen Hogan. Karen, nice to see you again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So a lot to talk about with this report, but I want to begin first and foremost with the report that dealt with First Nations housing, because in it you note the fact that this is the fourth time that your office has audited the government's progress on this file. And really, the situation is as dire as it was from the very first report. What's stopping progress here?
I think that's a complicated question to answer, and you're right. It's been 4 reports over the course of 20 years, which is really an entire generation of people. And in my view, it is the passive and siloed approach that the public service is taking to many Indigenous files, especially here in the case of housing. While they've invested so much time and money over the last few years, almost $4 billion to be exact, the housing conditions have remained relatively unchanged, and 80% of community needs are still not being met. So it, in my view, is time for a real fundamental shift in how the government approaches Indigenous matters that will respect reconciliation and self-determination, which are 2 commitments that really they've expressed recently that these historical programs are just not keeping pace with.
So what would that shift look like? How do you think things might be more efficient?
I think to understand that, you have to know how programs are run and managed now. Many of the programs, whether it be around safe drinking water or access to emergency care, or here housing, and even in our second report on First Nations policing, communities need to be aware that these programs exist, and then they need to apply for them. And so that's where capacity becomes a real important issue, and that's one of the things I think that needs to be addressed more fundamentally. If a community doesn't have a dedicated housing manager when it comes to looking at housing conditions, there's no one there to become aware of the programs that are available and then apply to them. So for example, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation has 13 different programs linked to housing in First Nations communities. First, you need to know which you want to apply to, but then you have to apply individually to all of those. So if you don't have the time or the capacity or the knowledge and awareness of all of this, it's a complex mechanism to weave. So I think it's that passive siloed approach that really needs to change going forward, where communities are supported more individually. And it's not just about funding or resourcing programs, it's about actually empowering communities and giving them a capacity in a long-term way to be able to take control of all of these programs.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's somewhat reflected in it, because you mentioned it as well when you moved to the second report, and this has to do with First Nations policing. And one of your key findings is that Public Safety Canada is not spending all of the money it has been allocated to provide and support policing services in these communities. Why is that happening? Is it also the siloed approach?
I think when you look at the 2 programs, it's kind of, it's odd. They're at different ends of the spectrum. One, housing, where it's estimated that $44 billion need to close the gap, and only $4 billion has been invested so far. And then you turn to the First Nations, Indigenous, and Inuit policing program, and money's being left on the table. I think it's important to know that there are 2 government entities involved. So there's Public Safety Canada, who manages the program, but then there's also the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who are providing the policing services. And what we saw is money being left on the table is 2 things. Because this is a matching program, so Public Safety Canada needs the province or territory to come to the table and fund any increases that maybe the federal government has available. So some money's going unspent there because the matching isn't available. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the RCMP, it is that they are not filling all the positions that are being funded under the program. So for example, in 2023, 61 police officers who should have been funded under this program, those positions were vacant. And so that leaves communities underserved.
Underserved, and in practical terms, what does that actually do to these communities?
I think it's important to know that policing service is really managed provincially. So there is a provincial police service in many provinces that is the RCMP. And then this program is meant to sort of supplement that regular service, but it's meant to be more community focused and proactive and really tailored to the community's cultures and needs. The agreements call for police officers to spend 100% of their time in the community to get to know them. And what we found is that the RCMP could only demonstrate that in 38% of the detachments that we looked at, that police officers were able to dedicate that amount of time. They were often being asked to fill core policing needs just generally in the province or territory. So it means that relationship to create trust between police and Indigenous communities is suffering.
Okay, we're quickly running out of time, but before you go, I do want to ask a question about your final report, and that has to do with the National Trade Corridors Fund, because it's a bit of a mixed review, because on the one hand you say the design was good, the implementation was good, but the tracking of the program was not so good. Why the discrepancy?
Well, this was a program where Transport Canada actually used a lot of data informing where the bottlenecks were in our transportation corridors across the country. And they used that to do targeted calls and really target where investments might go, whether it be airports or marine ports and so on. So while that was great, it was well informed and it was transparent to the public, they didn't set themselves up to measure the results of this and whether or not this is a $4 billion fund again, whether or not that they were going to get the outcomes that they achieved. So when you look at infrastructure projects, they take a long time to be finished, but there's also a long time to see results. So Transport Canada has the opportunity to adjust and collect better information to be able to say more than just we built another dock at a port, but that dock actually increased the amount of volume or cargo that could come through the port. And that's the kind of fluidity improvement you'd like to see in our transportation corridors.
Karen Hogan, always appreciate the time. Thank you very much for all of this.
Thank you.